Is Mets owner Steve Cohen already ready to throw in the towel on the New York Mets?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LockedOnMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, the New York Mets lost again on Wednesday night, and in just embarrassing fashion. Sloppy defense, bad pitching. Joey Lucchesi looked good through 4. Fifth inning unravels on him, walks the first couple batters, makes a bad play on a sac bunt attempt, loads the bases, then he gives up some hits, and he walked in a run first, then gave up some hits. They go to Hartwig. Hartwig gives up a couple in the 6th inning after getting the Mets through the 5th. Adrian Hauser comes on. He gives up runs. Just brutal. Like, there was some silver linings if you look at Mark Vientos' performance. RBI double in the 1st inning. Got a hit later in the game. Scored on a double by Jeff McNeil. JD Martinez homered. Pete Alonso doubled and scored a run. Tomas Nido with a couple of hits. There were some bright spots in the offense, but when the lineup hits, and 5 runs and 9 hits is a huge jump from what they've been doing, but still not outstanding. But your pitching gives up 10 runs. It just looks horrible. And even Francisco Lindor making another error tonight. I mean, it was just a sloppy, bad game. And Mets fans are going to be pissed, and rightfully so. Over the last 22 games since the Mets won that series against the Dodgers, they're 7-15. This month, they're 4-9. It's been a brutal stretch. And with all of that said, the fact that Steve Cohen is talking about selling right now is absolutely absurd. Now, there's a lot of layers to this. For those of you who don't know, Steve Cohen sent out a tweet on an article, replying to an article or leaving a comment on an article that was posted on Twitter that was about blowing up the New York Mets this year. And he said, quote, "All in the future, not much we can do until trade deadline." So here's where this is really interesting to me, because what he said itself is not interesting. If the New York Mets are out of it, they're going to sell, as any smart team in baseball would do. And compared to last year, where it was a team that was World Series or bust going in, this team has always been hang around 500. If you're a little bit better, you're a playoff team. If you're a little bit worse, you sell, you focus on the future, you give playing time to Mark Vientos and Brett Baty, whatever it is, right? And yes, we could have a conversation, and at some point this year, we probably will, about how JD Martinez could be dealt and the pitching can be dealt and what happens with Pete Alonso. All of that's coming. All of that is in the future, as Steve Cohen said. So what he said is not crazy. It's the fact that he said it that is. And how he found the "let's blow it up" piece is fascinating to me, because this was not a story that was published 10 minutes after the game by MLB.com that Steve Cohen is replying to. It's not something from SNY or The Athletic, one of these outlets that covers the Mets and gets a lot of traction for their stories. It was Max Metz. And hey, Mac might be listening, and if so, I appreciate you. With all due respect to Max Metz, I haven't heard of Max Metz before. Probably some guy who's got his own blog, and that is fantastic. And write all those pieces about blowing up the Mets right now. That's what you should do as a blogger at this time. You're airing out the frustrations. Love that. No problems there. Steve Cohen finding that tweet and commenting on it, where it got sent out, mind-blowing to me. Now, I will give a shout out to Mets News and Links. It's at John from Albany on Twitter, and he sends out my show every single day, as he sends out pretty much every piece of Mets content that hits the interwebs. He posts it. So it was his tweet from Max Metz a day ago after the last Mets lost that somehow ended up on Steve Cohen's feed. Now, that could have been a happy accident. It could have been just divine intervention. Here's a pissed off Steve Cohen, and the algorithm puts that atop his news feed, and he just can't help himself, and he sends out the tweet. deletes it, but it's too late. That could be what happened. Or maybe Steve Cohen is searching on Twitter. Is anyone talking about blowing up this team? Because that's what I feel like right now. And again, behind closed doors, Steve Cohen is justified in feeling that he cares about this team. I'd much rather have an owner that cares than an owner that doesn't of the New York Mets, and the guy that's investing in the team. And I will never criticize Steve Cohen's ownership of the team or how he runs this business. One at all. Some of the stuff on social media, which he has cleaned up, he almost just needs to stay away, because that's a horrible look for Francisco Lindor after a brutal loss to have to see trending on Twitter Steve Cohen saying, all in the future, not much we can do until the trade deadline. Here's a team that's trying to fight out of this horrible slump they're in, and now they got to look over their shoulder again, knowing that another sale is coming. Like, come on. Last year, I was curious because Steve Cohen had his midseason presser, the State of the Union, our team sucks, we're going to sell it if they don't step up in the next month. And I was curious when that took place. I was like, was that in May? Was that in June? When exactly did Steve Cohen address the media? So I found an article by this great outlet, Just Baseball. They have an awesome managing editor who wrote the piece, Ryan Finkelstein. No, it's me. And I was curious what the date was. So June 28th, 2023. 5 biggest takeaways from Steve Cohen's midseason presser. Takeaway 1, no one is getting fired midseason. That was a big point of reference. Point 2, I find hilarious reading it back. David Stern's about to get a massive check. That was in June. He got hired in, September? I was reading between the lines. Literally, the start of that section of the article is, okay, this takeaway is me reading between the lines, but bear with me for a minute. And I talk about how he kept on referencing the president vacancy that the Mets have in the organization and wanting to fill that, and how that was going to set out the franchise. And here you go. Now it's David Stern's team. Then he had responsibility for losing lies with the players, was another takeaway I had, because he was putting it on the players, not the manager. From biggest buyer to unprecedented seller was my 4th takeaway, because it's like, all right, the Mets might eat money. Talked about that. The fact that they had done that with Escobar at that point, had done it in the offseason with James McCann. Well, we saw that play out in a massive, massive way. And then the final takeaway was the Mets are in great hands with Steve Cohen, which I still believe. But that was June 28th last year when I wrote that article. So that press conference took place at the end of June. We're in the middle of May. And talking, thinking, putting it out into the ether that the Mets are selling at this junction of the season from the guy up top is a horrid look. It just is. What he said, nothing bad to it. Saying it publicly, awful look. Because guess what? We don't need you to tell us, Steve, that if the Mets are out of it in the future, you're going to sell. We all want you to do that. But your team doesn't need to see that, man. They don't. And that's just one of those things that I can't imagine how Pete Alonso processes that. Think about that. I mentioned Lindor. How about Pete, man? You're already having so much weighing on you. The team struggles, your struggles, your contract year, and the fact that he could get dealt, and the owner is alluding to it after a brutal loss. I'm sorry, it's a bad look. And what I want to do next is really what I was hoping was going to be sort of the lead of the show today, which is the fact that the Mets are entering the second quarter of their season. What's this team going to look like over this 40-game stretch, and can they hang in the race so that they can really take off in the third quarter of the season? I got a theory on this, so I want to break it down in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Of course, I am talking about GameTime. And I'll tell you what, I live in South Florida. I'd love to go to the Christian Scott start. I would on Friday night. Unfortunately, I got a double date. Some good friends of ours. We've been planning this for a while, so unfortunately, I can't get to it. But I'm looking on the GameTime app right now, and I'm seeing you can get in the ballpark for as low as $4, and you can sit like 16 rows behind home plate in that second section behind the Diamond Club in the Marlins Park there for $17 a seat. And I might try to get out to Saturday's game. And again, I can get into the ballpark for as cheap as $5. The best part about Game Time, you get views of the seat before you arrive, so you know what to expect. And all-in prices up front, no hidden fees. You know exactly what you're going to pay when you check out. Game Time is the place to go for the best deals on last-minute tickets as well. You can buy tickets as much as an hour into the game. You could be still looking to get into the ballpark. So if you want to buy tickets to any Mets games this year, make sure you use Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use the code LockedOnMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LockedOnMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Lately, with the Mets losing so much, I am loving being able to engage with this audience through our texting service because I get some hilarious texts every day from Mets fans who are just at their wits' end. The Steve Cohen of texters, you might say. And it's been a lot of fun to engage with you guys. If you want to be part of the Locked On Mets Insider community, where you get the lineup graphics sent to your phone each day, as well as the full episodes of the show, and you can ask me questions anytime. You can be part of our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. All of that is available if you look at the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, this ball club is 19-22 through their first 42 games. With that said, there's 120 games left to play with. A lot of season is on the table here. We've referenced the fact that David Stearns looks at the first 45 days of a season and wants to let that play out before he makes assessments. Considering the moves the Mets just made, just after that window, bringing up Mark Vientos, setting down Jose Butto, which we'll talk about more in the next segment. That was a surprise. Having Hauser out of the rotation now and getting McGill and Peterson coming back. Like, this team's about to take a new shape. And you really have to break this thing down and try to figure out, all right, who are the Mets going to be over this next stretch? We saw what they just were in the first quarter. It was a very streaky team that got great pitching for a 15-game stretch and enough hitting where they went 12-3 and they pulled themselves out of an early season slump. And then they lost their young stud rookie catcher and have really fallen flat since then. I'm not saying this is all Francisco Alvarez, but that is sort of a turning point that the momentum has really kind of fallen off from. So let's now talk about what the next stretch is going to be like. Christian Scott's now part of the equation. Tyler McGill, David Peterson will be part of the equation. I think this rotation is going to get a little bit better. And all of a sudden, you're seeing JD Martinez hit a couple home runs over this past week. His bat's starting to turn the corner. Mark Vientos gives you another good bat. DJ Stewart, in a limited role, can give you good at-bats. And then I've been seeing signs, as much as every time any of these guys goes 0-for-3 or makes a bad play, we get the Nimmo, Lindor, Alonso sucks reaction, which is just Mets fans who are frustrated. I get it. I think all of them have been showing signs of starting to get it going. So there is a top 5 in this lineup that we saw play in the game today with Nimmo, Alonso, Lindor, Martinez, Vientos. That could be really good. And I think you can still have DJ Stewart providing something. And now that Brett Beatty isn't at the face left-handed pitching, maybe he's going to be a little bit better, especially with that internal competition. Got to make sure you don't just lose your job to Vientos outright, end up in AAA, or Mark Vientos is playing third base every day. This is the time where we're going to see this team adjust and change a little bit. And I think that they can do well in this stretch. Now you look at the games that they're about to play. Schedule's not easy on them. You still have one more against Philly. You get a nice break against the Marlins, 3 against the Guardians, who have played well this year, but it's not playing your own division. You come home, you got Giants, Dodgers, D-backs. You play 3 in D.C., then you go to the London series. Okay, so there's 20 games until the London series. Can the Mets be 500 during that stretch? Can they be a little bit better than that? Who knows? But let's just say, law of averages, they win against the Phillies on Thursday, which is, not necessarily something we'd expect, but you never know. And then they sweep the Marlins. Well, guess what? They'll be right back to 500, 23-23. And then from that point on, you'd still have 16 games until you got to the London series, right? So let's just say you go 500 over that. This team very well could be sitting in that position where they're somewhere around 500 as they get to the halfway point of the season. And then everything's in the play because right now They're 4 games under, and they're 1 game out of the wild card spot. No one is running away with that third wild card spot. It's partly why it's kind of bad for baseball that it's in there, but also it keeps every team engaged, which I think is good for baseball, and it goes against tanking. If you look at this quarter of the season, you have that 20-game stretch I just ran through and outlined. You got the London series. You got home versus the Marlins and Padres, road versus the Rangers and Cubs, home for a 2-gamer against the Yankees. Then you got the Astros. That's 19 more games that you'll play from London series on. So there's a 39-game stretch the Mets are about to go through from right now, middle of May, all the way through the end of June. With this sort of mix of players on this roster, you'd imagine, before you might get a Kodai Senga back, although he should return at some point in June, and Alvarez as well. But those guys, I would imagine it's mid to late June at this point, particularly Alvarez. But even Senga, I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being closer to late June. So in this stretch, though, let's just say the Mets do that. They win the next 4 games, they're 500. They'll have 35 games left of that stretch. And let's even say they win 17 of those games. They're 1 game's on under. They're 40 and 41 at the halfway point if all of that happens. They will not be out of the race at all come July. And then you might have Kodai Senga, Christian Scott, Luis Severino in the same rotation. Sean Manaea, probably one of those starters. And then whoever has pitched the best between David Peterson, Tyler McGill. I hope Adrian Hauser's not in the team anymore, but you never know. Jose Budo, Joey Lucchesi, all those different guys that be in the mix. The Mets could have a really good rotation, a good bullpen, and that lineup could click. And if they're at that point where all those things start to come together in July, the schedule lays out for them to be a team that's going to be in great position come the deadline, because if they can be around 500 going into July, well, they got 14 games before the All-Star break where they're going to play the Nationals for 7, the Pirates for 4, the Rockies for 3, and they come out of the All-Star break with 4 against the Marlins in Miami. That's 18 games where this team could play way over their heads because their competition might not be that good. And all of a sudden, let's say you go 13-5 over that stretch. The Mets are sitting at 53-46, a game away from the century mark, 7 games over. Now, look, I'm not saying all this is going to happen, but what I'm saying is it's May 16th. I know the Mets are horrible right now, and it's not fun to watch them. Maybe you tune out for a couple of days and just tune into Locked On Mets each day, and I'll get you covered. I'll update you on whatever happened. And once the vibes start turning, you hop right back on. But this is so early in the season. We'll see what this next quarter looks like. If over the next 39 games until the Mets get into July, they go 12-27, well, then they are just a bad baseball team. And we know, like, okay, at that point, yeah, they're gonna sell at the end of July. But you got to give them a chance, because this team has played good baseball at stretches this year, and I don't think that they're that far away from getting back to it as bad as it has looked. And I believe that Mark Vientos and the way they're going to play third base, and also the pressure that it puts on Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor. Today, we watched Francisco Lindor, or not Francisco Lindor, excuse me. We watched McNeil foul a ball off himself, where it was like, man, is Brett Beatty playing second? Because apparently he's the emergency shortstop and second baseman now. Is that where we're at? Didn't end up happening. He ends up staying in the game. But I think the pressure that those two guys have now might create some diamonds. McNeil had an RBI double today. He drove the ball pretty well. So yeah, let's give this team time, because when you get to the end of the third quarter, or not even the end of the third quarter, but when you get to the end of July, still in the middle of that third quarter of the season, before you get to that stretch run where you got to make some decisions at the deadline, who knows who's knocking on the door? Who knows if Jet Williams or Luis Angel Acuna or Drew Gilbert has gone on a tear, and you might have a new second baseman coming up or a new outfielder. Who knows if the Mets might make a move at the deadline? We don't know what they're going to be when they get there. And it's foolish to sit here right now in the middle of May to be counting the Mets trade chips come that time. We'll do that in a couple months if this team's horrible. But I want to talk a little bit about the Jose Budo demotion, and also a touch of a farm report here. A couple of prospect news and notes I want to hit on. So we'll get to all that in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It is winner-take-all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So place a $5 bet on the NBA team you think is going to win. Let's just say you believe the Nuggets are going to beat the Timberwolves, end up advancing in the playoffs. Go ahead, put $5 on it. If you like the Knicks, $5 there. They win, you win, $150 in bonus bets. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Speaking of the NBA and NHL playoffs, make sure you're up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Jose Butto was surprisingly optioned down on Wednesday to make room for Joey Lucchesi. Now, on yesterday's show, I made my case for why Adrian Hauser should be DFA'd, but Hauser ended up being the guy that gave the Mets some bulk in a game that they were going to lose tonight. We'll see if Hauser survives another day after giving up a couple runs and looking bad yet again. I just don't see value in him. If the Mets want fresh arms in their bullpen, you might as well get rid of him and maybe cycle Grant Hartwig as well as he pitched to get some more blood up. And at that point, I don't even believe, based on yesterday's show and the research I did, I don't think there's really anyone else they can call on other than Drew Smith coming off the IL and then adding someone to the 40. But hey, if you DFA Hauser, 40-man spot opens up, bring up Yaxel Rios and Smith and give this bullpen some new arms. So that whole side of it made sense, but the fact that Butto's not part of this rotation now, a little bit surprising. Really thought the Mets were going to go to a 6-man rotation with Scott, Sevy, Minaya, Quintana, Butto, and McGill. But now you remove Butto from the equation. Why? Well, you can say there is something he has to work on. That's walks. He has walked 21 batters in 38 innings so far. With that said, he's pitched to a 3.08 ERA, and batters are hitting 171 against him. To me, Jose Butto deserved to stay on this roster. But when you consider the situation the Mets are in, with Tyler McGill ready to return to the rotation, this made a lot of sense because now you look at the road ahead. You got Quintana going against Philly. You got most likely Christian Scott, Luis Severino, and Sean Manaea going against the Marlins. And then you can have Tyler McGill inserted right back into this rotation and pitch against the Guardians. Now, what they do at the end of that Guardian series, that's where it gets pretty interesting because you could go 5 days rest, not 5 days rest, regular rest, pitching on the 5th day for Quintana and Scott. And that's your new 5-man rotation. You get an off day. So then everybody gets a blow and you run through your 5 guys before you maybe have to make a decision to add another starting pitcher. And at that point in time, David Peterson would be ready to go. So it makes a lot of sense in that regard. If the Mets ultimately decide to give Hauser a spot start in Cleveland, which I think a lot of us would hate, they can get through this stretch without Jose Butto, and you have the ability to option him. It just is an unfortunate situation for him, but something the Mets felt they had to do, and I get it. Tyler McGill on his rehab assignment threw 14 innings. He struck out 23. He walked just 1. David Peterson has also thrown 14 innings on his rehab assignment. He has struck out 24. He has walked just 1. Now, for Peterson, a ton of those innings against low A competition, but against the high A guys, he also didn't walk anybody and struck out 8. Or not high, double A, his last rehab start. For McGill, it's been stops along the way at each affiliate, basically, and he's consistently pounding the zone and getting strikeouts. Now, in the big leagues against the great competition, yes, these guys are going to have to pitch around the zone a little bit more, and they're going to walk some more batters. But I believe that these two guys might have reached a point in their career where they could be nice pieces for you, whether in the bullpen or the rotation. And I could see a world eventually where the Mets get to a point where whether they have Hauser still or if it's just Peterson pitching out of the pen, or it might be 2 guys who are in the bullpen / rotation where it's kind of flexy, right? Sometimes you might have to go to David Peterson to pitch 4 innings to back up Christian Scott, who only got through 4 or 3, whatever it is. Other times, things line up. You want to give your starters a day, and Hauser or Peterson or Butto, whoever's in this sort of swing role, hasn't pitched in 4 days. they're going to get the bulk of a bullpen game to start, give you 4 innings like Joey Lucchesi did today originally, and then you pull that guy. Because if the Mets had pulled Joey Lucchesi and gone to their bullpen in the 5th inning in a 2-1 game, maybe they win this one. The Mets are going to be creative with their pitching staff, and optioning Budo was the first sign of it. He'll be back this season. I'm not too concerned about it. They're going to need all these guys, really, except for Hauser. Get Hauser out of there. We don't want to see him anymore. Now, big prospect news. The Mets have signed or will sign Elian Pena in the next international free agent window to a $5 million signing bonus. Now, he is a shortstop now, could be a second baseman, could be a third baseman. The bat is reportedly legit, but you just look at the bonus and understand the type of prospect that Pena is. This might be talking 2031 Mets right now. Who knows? But very interested to see them this aggressive to land a guy, because the Mets only have a little bit over $6 million to play with in that bonus pool, 6.26. And they're devoting $5 million of it to this kid Pena. So you should be excited about that. It's going to be a while before we even find out that this is confirmed next January and official, and that he's actually playing in the minor leagues for the Mets, and we can get a look at him. But it is exciting, especially off the heels of signing Giovanni Rodriguez this past offseason to a very big chunk of their bonus pool. Now, there is one last little prospect note that I've been waiting days to get to, and that's Ryan Clifford getting promoted up to AA. And I talked to Aram Layton about this, who is, of course, our prospect expert at justbaseball.com, and tried to see if my hypothesis was correct, that is this just get Clifford the hell out of Brooklyn? And that's basically what it is. And then I think Andy Green even said that to Tacoma or somebody. It got out there. Andy Green, who's heading up player development, pretty much indicated the Mets just did not want Ryan Clifford playing in Brooklyn anymore. And you ask why? It's because it is a ballpark built on the water on a boardwalk where the wind can be brutal, especially this time of year. And they were probably looking at quality of contact and different balls that he hit well that were just dying out in right field, and think, all right, let's get him out of here, and let's send him to Binghamton where his swing can play better. He was showing really good discipline when it comes to walks. He was striking out too much, which is just something that you probably are going to have to deal with Ryan Clifford, who, I said all of this so that you guys potentially know who I'm talking about. Ryan Clifford is a prospect the Mets got back in the Justin Verlander trade last year. He was the second prospect, but the guy that maybe has the higher ceiling, particularly with his power potential. He's 20 years old. He's going to turn 21 in July. Now he gets to get his first chance in AA at 20 years old. So far, he is 1 for 7 in a couple of games, 3 strikeouts, 1 walk. We'll see how he fares. I think this is a great challenge for him. It's where he's going to spend the entire season. I don't think we're going to see Ryan Clifford until probably 2025, if not 2026, but you never know. If he has a great season, he might surprise us. Last year, he had 24 home runs as mostly a 19-year-old, or a 19-year-old for half the season, 20-year-old for the second half there. But he's a really interesting prospect. I'm excited to see what he does in AA. And one other thing that I got from my conversation with Arm, he said Clifford had just been very passive this year. You don't know if that's because of the ballpark he was playing in, not having the confidence to really attack in the zone, or if it was just pitchers in high A not wanting to go near him as the one bat that they probably circled in that lineup that could kill them. That's probably a bigger side of it. So now you go to AA, where he might get challenged in the zone a little bit more, and we'll see if he's a little more aggressive now at that next level. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. We'll see what happens. Mets game against the Phillies on Thursday. I'll be breaking that down on tomorrow's show. Probably make it a Friday Farm Report as well, give you a little more prospect news and notes, and then also preview what lies ahead against the Miami Marlins. So it should be a jam-packed show. Make sure you don't miss it. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to make a push to 9,000 subs, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. And now head over for your second watch today. Check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that covers everything in the world of sports.